Please open your Bibles with me to John chapter 3. We'll finish the Lord's discourse as it relates to Nicodemus coming to see him at night, seemingly desiring to have private audience with the Lord, and the Lord begins right off the bat, just a couple of sentences in. Nicodemus, and remember who he is, a supremely religious individual. Nicodemus, you must be born again. And he begins to set illustration before him, and he begins to take him to the Old Testament scriptures that Nicodemus would have been familiar with, and he continues to show him what it means to be born again, what that looks like. And Nicodemus, you must be born again. And what we want to look at tonight is the wrapping up of that dialogue with him. And we're back up to verses 16 and 17, and we'll see and be reminded that God sent God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. I believe what the impact of that is, God so loved His creation and the arrangement that He had set into order, and man had so marred it with sin that He sent His only begotten Son to be a redeemer and a remedy for the situation man had created. Verse 18 we looked at a couple of weeks ago. He that believeth on Him is not condemned. He that believeth not is condemned already, because he hath not believed in the name of the only begotten Son of God. So to believe in Christ is to be judged, not guilty, in Christ. But to not believe is to be judged guilty already for that unbelief, because that unbelief is active. That is a rejection of God's one, God's redeeming Son, God's remedy that He set before us. Verse 19, and this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. The natural man rejects God. The natural man rejects light. The natural man, because of his depravity, wants nothing to do with spiritual illumination. Now, there may be some circumstances where the natural man sees his life become such a ruin that he's trying to save his job, save his career, save his marriage, save his life. He may try to retrofit some spiritual activity or some religious activity, but left up to ourselves in our depravity, the natural man, because of that depravity, being dead in trespasses and sins, has no desire for the light. And we'll develop that through the evening. It is the working of God to bring an individual to a place where they desire to have that light. That depravity that I talk about and will talk about tonight, I'm talking about a nature of sin, born with the capacity and the propensity to sin, not having to be taught how to sin, not having to be coaxed into sin, not having to be tempted with sin, but we by nature do sin. From our earliest years, we learn how to manipulate people, and from our earliest years, we learn how to demonstrate selfishness and our depravity. That doesn't mean that every individual does every sin known to man. That's not what I mean by depravity. But I mean that every person is born in sin. David said, in sin did my mother conceive me. He wasn't talking about the act. He was talking about the fact that he was born with a sin nature. And we demonstrate that from the earliest of our ages. And that depravity renders an individual without any desire. You don't see the natural man, apart from the working of God, you don't see the natural man just begging heaven for more light. Give me more light. Now, if you see that, you know God's working. But the natural man, left up to himself, will not. Light has come into the world, and men loved darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. A couple of passages. First of all, John 8. John 8 and verse 12, where Jesus identifies himself as this. Jesus speaking says, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. Remember John 1:4. In him was the light of life. So this light is a spiritual illumination. This light is of God. Now, Jesus is the light of the world, but for that light to be imparted, for that light, for us to live in the influence and effect of that light, that's God working regeneration. We begin to walk in light on this new life imparted in, and he tells Nicodemus how that happens, like the wind moving through the trees. The sovereign operation of God upon the recipients of grace. But Jesus said, I'm the light of the world. So it's a picture that we are granted here by the light and the illumination and the spiritual illumination that is the fulfillment of that picture. Everybody's experienced probably at some point in their lives complete darkness, or something close to complete darkness. And there's caves, and you get deep enough in the cave, and there's this complete darkness that you can't see an inch in front of your face. And the smallest of light just illuminates that space. Men don't want that light. The spiritual fulfillment of that picture, they don't want it. And we'll develop why that is. But Jesus is the source of this spiritual light. And Jesus is the remedy that God sent out of love for his creation. And men rejected him. Men choose darkness. Men love darkness rather than light because their deeds were evil. As I say, man in general, generally speaking, men are not inclined to beg to the heavens. I want to understand more about God. I want to understand more about what he requires of me. I want to understand more. Now, God brings his people to that place, and they do seek that. But I'm talking about the natural man, left up to himself. And that, the earliest recollections of my spiritual journey, I wasn't begging for more light. I was just trying to be more religious. Because I began to realize, left up to myself and by myself, I was not prepared to meet God. And so the first inclination of my heart was, clean up my life. Well, Nicodemus had cleaned up his life to the nth degree. And Jesus said, that's not enough. You must be born again. So this is the condemnation, verse 19. Light has come into the world. The remedy, the illumination of all you need has come into the world. And men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light. To practice evil. They don't to do with the light, they reject it. And that's the depravity. That's the natural state of a human being. Just rejects it. Doesn't want anything to do with it. Verse 20. Everyone that doeth evil hateth the light. It's just a demonstration of his spiritual deadness. It's just a demonstration of Ephesians 2:1. He's dead in trespasses and sins. This is the condemnation, that light has come into the world. Men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light. Neither cometh to the light. On his own, he doesn't. He doesn't. I say this all the time. It's not simply that the lost man can't on his own work up the merit that he needs to stand before God appropriately. He doesn't even want to. It's not so bad that he can't in his dead in trespasses and sins condition. He doesn't want to unless the Lord begins to work on the wanter. And you see, that's exactly what the Lord's telling Nicodemus. Nicodemus, you supremely a religious individual. You must be born again. Because your religion won't take you far enough. And he describes that with illustration after illustration, and the look of faith on the brazen serpent in the wilderness, and he describes it in human pictures that and Old Testament pictures that Nicodemus can understand. And then he gets down to the nitty-gritty here at the end of this dialogue. The natural man doesn't want the light. He might want some spirituality or some religiality. He might want some religious activity. Makes him feel good. But he doesn't, left up to himself, want the light. We need to understand that as preachers need to understand that as they're addressing individuals. The light illuminates. And they don't want that illumination. Everyone that makes a practice of evil, hateth the light. Think about Cain and Abel. Think about Cain and Abel. By faith, Abel offered that which was accepted by God. Without faith, Cain offered the fruit of his hands. And you can read the dialogue with God and Cain in the book of Genesis. And God implies that Cain knew better, but didn't obey. By faith, or by the lack of faith, he offered the fruit of his hands. And instead, when God reproved Cain, instead of Cain saying, "Oh, I'm glad you pointed out my error. I will course correct. I will fix this," he didn't do that. He didn't want the light. He wanted to do what he wanted to do, how he wanted to do it. And that's the picture of the natural man. The Pharisees are another prime example. The light is standing there with them, and they don't say, "Oh, thank you for showing us our error. Thank you. 1,000 thank yous, Jesus. We'll from now forward go the way you tell us to." No, they said, "Kill him. Get rid of him." That's what the natural man does. That's how the natural man thinks. That's how Nicodemus would be unless the Lord intervenes. And it would seem as though the Lord did intervene in Nicodemus' life, given his relationship to the Lord after this dialogue later after the crucifixion. Verse 20, "For everyone that doeth evil hateth the light, neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds be reproved." He doesn't want to be reproved. That means to be told his fault. No human has any natural desire for this. Leave me alone. I want to do what I want to do. Yet, there's an entire movement. I don't know if it's as popular as it was, but the seeker-sensitive movement was an entire movement based on giving men what they wanted. Go into a town, survey the people, see what they want, fashion a religious organization based on what they say, and give it to them. They don't want the light. They don't want the truth. They want programs for the kids. They want Starbucks coffee. They want creature comforts. They want this, that, and the other thing. And people come along and provide that for them and grow a big crowd. And everybody, look at the things that are being done for God. What's being done for God? If it's not rooted in truth, if it's not a work of the Spirit of God, if it's man-centered thinking, giving men what they want just to appeal to the wants of the natural man who hates the light, what's accomplished for God? I say that it is so counterproductive because now all these folks think they're good. They got religious, they turned over some new leaves, and things better now. There's nothing valuable, in my estimate, in the sight of God, in that whole endeavor. And coupled with that mentality of the seeker-sensitive approach, and that's kind of an old term, but it's carried on today in new terminology and packaging, but just telling individuals how incredibly valuable they are and how that God has a wonderful plan for their life. All you need to do is sprinkle a little Jesus on top of whatever you're doing and never require any substantive change in their life. Never require to walk in truth. Never required to. You go to Colossians 3. There's a whole list of put these things off. And there's a whole list of put these things on. But none of that is connected to giving men what they want. And what they want is darkness. And offering them a watered-down version of religiosity to sprinkle on top of their life so that they can go on and do what they're doing. Many times, living in immorality, that's fine. Love the sinner, hate the sin, let him go on in it. Just get religious, and it's okay. And that's not what Jesus is saying to Nicodemus. That the natural man just wants darkness. The natural man doesn't have any desire to be shown his error. And another thing that these movements are lacking, this mentalities of giving the individual what they want. Another thing that it's lacking is the requirement of Jesus. You must be born again. And at that point, the light of life springs in their heart. And they begin to say, to begin to see, there's some obvious changes I need to be making. And not so that I can earn my salvation, not so that I can earn merit before God, no. But there's some obvious changes I need to make in my life to obey the one who saved me, to honor the one who saved me. Starting in verse 19 again, and this is the condemnation, that light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds are evil. For everyone that doeth evil, all that practice evil, all that make a lifestyle of practicing sin, wickedness. Now, That don't limit that in your mind. Don't limit that evil to just immorality. Don't limit that evil to just sexual sins, murder, thievery, adultery. Don't limit that evil to just immorality. What else is evil? Rejecting Jesus. What else is evil? Saying, I don't want the life. God has given, out of love for His creation, a remedy for the situation that man has created. And the situation is getting worse by the day, and it's so clearly provable. And men are not begging for the light. And that's evil. That's wicked. It shows the depravity. Everyone that doeth evil. And make sure that when you think about that doing evil, you broaden your definition of that to go beyond simple immorality. What are the first two commandments in the 10 Commandments? There's only one God. There's only one way to serve Him. And by the way, remember His day to keep it holy. So you begin the 10 Commandments with our relationship vertically, and end them with our relationships horizontally. And the breaking of any of them will fall into the category of sin and disobedience. So it's not just immorality that's addressed in the 10 Commandments. And so it's not just immorality that's addressed when we say, verse 20, for everyone that doeth evil hateth the light. So you broaden the definition of what it is to do evil. And you recognize what that's flowing out of is a hatred for the light. Neither cometh to the light, lest his deeds should be reproved. But, verse 21 brings a contrast. He that doeth truth, he that practices a lifestyle of operating within the truth of the Word of God, he cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they, listen to this, are wrought in God. His deeds are wrought in God. Verse 21 is talking about one who has been worked upon by God. His deeds are wrought in God. What are we talking about? That God has so worked in his life to spiritual regeneration. And the light of life has sprung within his heart. The illumination of the Spirit's work in regeneration has taken hold. That which the natural man didn't want anything to do with until God began to work on him, that which the natural man couldn't do anything to spark within himself, God, in His sovereign working of regeneration in the heart of an individual, springs forth that work wrought in God. And he doeth truth. And he comes to the light. He begins to walk in truth. I see this coming to the light as another way of describing being born again. And there we come full circle to what the Lord started with Nicodemus in verse 3. You must be born again. And to be born again, I believe, is to have the light of God springing up in one's heart. Light of God, because of the new life implanted within. Now his deeds are different. He that doeth truth cometh to the light. That his deeds, now they're way different than the other man, his deeds may be made manifest. The light makes things manifest. What do we begin to see? His deeds are wrought in God, enabled by God, led by God, for the glory of God. It reminds you of Matthew 5 and verse 16. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. Right? It reminds you of Ephesians 2 and verse 10. After that discourse of God's amazing sovereign grace, and he said that we are the workmanship of God. We're the vessels of mercy. Romans 9. The workmanship of God. Ephesians 2 and verse 10. Deeds wrought in God. Deeds that have their enabling roots in the sovereign Spirit working upon the recipients of His amazing grace. And that brings us full circle to where the Lord started in the third verse of this same text. Nicodemus, you must be born again. What is that? The Spirit of God bringing life. The Spirit of God moving in such a way that it brings about an obvious change. And that change is different from one to the other. That change is faster and slower from one to the other. Paul references in Romans 14 those that are weaker and those that are stronger. All of that's true, but a change that God makes by the Spirit of God being given. Where Paul can say in Ephesians 2 and verse 1, you hath He quickened, who were dead in trespasses and sins. Now we all had our walk according to the course of this world, but God, who is rich in mercy, intervened and showed grace. For by grace are you saved, through faith. That not of yourselves, that faith not of yourselves. It is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. Yes, the child of God comes to the light. The child of God has deeds that are different, and if you're like me, my deeds aren't as different as I'd like them to be. But the desire is to live for the Lord and continue to grow in the light, because God has changed my heart. I no longer hate God and love sin. I no longer hate the truth and love darkness. I want to walk in light. And what we have for light, Psalm 119, 105, Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. I want to walk in His light. Psalm 119, 34 or 35, make me to go in the paths of Thy righteousness, is the psalmist's cry. Why? Because God's worked in his heart. He desires to do truth. He's come to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. And then the child of God finds himself responsible. Yes, we are responsible. For the choices we make, we're responsible. For the directions we go, the paths that we take, based on the Word of God. So we end with where we started, because Jesus did. You must be born again. Left up to ourselves, we will continue to walk in darkness, and that's what we want. But if, by the grace of God, He shows you your need of Him, if, by the grace of God, He takes you to a place where you're sick of the darkness. That's where He got me. I'm sick of it. I want to live for the Lord. If, by the grace of God, He works that work in your heart, let it be known, trusted Christ. Let it be known you want to serve Him. Let it be known you want to follow Him in truth. He that doeth the truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest, that they are wrought in God. I pray that is your heart's desire. Let's stand.